Washington football team fans, what is up, and welcome back to another episode of the Bleeding BnG podcast, episode 53. So let's get to the nitty gritty first. If you're checking this out on YouTube, be sure to comment, like, and subscribe. We're seeing our views jump up, and we're loving the interaction that we've been making with the Washington Commander fans, and we appreciate all the love and support that we've been getting. If you're checking this out audio only, we're available on all podcast platforms. But if you're checking us out on Apple Podcasts and Spotify specifically, please rate and review. Please rate and review so we can finesse these algorithms, so we can get the Bleeding BnG podcast to be the number one thing that pops up on your content. We're going to be your number one content hub for everything Washington Commanders. So now that that's out of the way, let's get to episode 53 of the Bleeding BnG podcast. We're going to call this episode Commanding the Draft. Commanding the Draft. And to give you a timestamp like I do for all of my episodes, today is Sunday, May 1st, and it's about 10 o'clock p.m. So today, in today's episode of Commanding the Draft, we're just going to be spending time analyzing and going over the Washington Commanders draft. This is a wrap-up. I've had about a day to sit over, to ponder, and go over some of my thoughts and how I feel about this draft, and I'm ready to share my thoughts with my amazing Washington Commanders community and fans. So gear up. We have an exciting episode to go through. I don't want to keep you guys for too long, so I'm trying to push this information because it isn't a lot of information. I want to push this information out as precise and as efficiently as possible. So let's roll with it. So we spent a lot of time in our last episode, in episode 52, talking about Jahan Dotson in our reaction episode. So we're not going to spend too much time on Jahan Dotson. If you want to see our thoughts on the Jahan Dotson pick, you can go back and look at our Jahan Dotson episode, like I said, in our episode 52. We're not too mad at the pick. We're actually going to talk about it a little bit when we go over the draft, but let's go over the slew of names that the Washington Commanders selected over the course of the 3-day draft period. So at round 1 at the pick 16, they selected receiver Jahan Dotson out of Penn State University. Round 2, pick 47, they selected defensive tackle Phadadrian Mathis, 6'4", 310 pounds, out of the University of Alabama. Round 3, they selected Brian Robinson with the 98th pick in the 3rd round. He's a 6'2", 225-pound running back out of the University of Alabama. In round 4 with the 115th pick, they selected safety Percy Butler. He's 6 feet, 194 pounds, out of the University of Louisiana. In the 5th round at 144, they selected quarterback Sam Howell. Quarterback, yes, they did draft a quarterback. Quarterback Sam Howell out of the University of North Carolina, and we'll be sure to touch a lot on that pick as well, because that was a lot of buzz. A lot of people are calling that the steal of the draft, so we're going to be sure to give that a lot of great analysis over the course of this amazing episode. With the 5th pick, with another 5th round pick, they were able to pick with the 149th pick, tight end Cole Turner. He's 6'6", 250 pounds, out of the University of Nevada. And then they had 2 7th round picks. With the 230th pick, they were able to select guard Chris Paul. No, I'm not talking about basketball. He's an offensive guard out of the University of Tulsa. He's about 6'3", 323 pounds. And then they selected with their last pick, the 240th pick in the draft, cornerback Christopher Harris out of Oklahoma State. He's about 6 feet and he's about 200 pounds. So that's just a list of names, and now we're going to talk about our overall synopsis about how we feel about the draft. So like I said, we touched a little bit about the Jahan Dotson pick on our last episode, so we're not going to get too much into the pick itself, but our overall synopsis of the draft will be reminisce, if not to exclude that. I don't want you guys, as the Washington Commanders community, we're going to be stuck on, and I was stuck on it that night, looking at it as a Jahan Dotson versus a Jameson Williams and a Chris Olave thing. These guys are going to be tied together in the case of Washington Commander fans at least, they're going to be tied together over the course of their careers, or at least as Jahan Dotson's career plays out, how long he's ever with the Washington Commanders. So don't look at it. I don't want you guys to look at it as, Jahan Dotson versus those two guys. I want you guys to look at it specifically as Chris Olave, because he was taken with the 11th pick, as Jahan Dotson versus Brian Robinson Jr. Jahan Dotson and Brian Robinson Jr., and safety Percy Butler versus Chris Olave. Because these were the 3 picks that were acquired with the trade back out of the 11th that, the New Orleans Saints jumped up to select Chris Olave. Because, Jahan Dotson, like I told you guys before, I don't think there's much of a margin. If there's any much of a gap between those two, I don't think that the margin's big. I think that the difference between those guys is marginal between a guy like Jahan Dotson and Chris Olave. But when you acquire a guy like Brian Robinson Jr. as well as a safety like Percy Butler, who a lot of people feel like is a reach in the 4th round, but if you look at it, you acquired 3 players, and then the drop off between the 2 main pieces or the 2 main attractions of the 2 sides of the pick, I don't think that there's a big drop off between those 2. So acquiring 2 other pieces, I think that Washington, personally, I think that they won the trade. But like I said, these guys, specifically Chris Olave and Jahan Dotson, they're going to be tied together over the course of the rest of their career, specifically over the Washington Commanders community. So that's something to look out for. But remember, guys, when you're looking at it, don't look at it as a 1 versus 1 trade. Look at it as a Jahan Dotson, Brian Robinson Jr., and Percy Butler versus a Chris Olave trade. And I know a lot of people want to start adding other picks because we did trade back in the 4th round to acquire another 5th round pick. So they wanted to add like Cole Turner in the draft, in the pick. But the reason I didn't include him in like this hypothetical trade package is because that trade back in the 4th round was acquired with our original 4th round pick. So that had nothing to do with the trade back and the picks that we acquired from the New Orleans Saints trading back from 11. So if you look at it in the scope of those 3 players against versus a guy like Chris Olave, I think Washington won the trade. But like I said, it's too early to tell on any of these things, guys. It is way too early to tell on any of these things. It takes a couple of years to judge a draft. So if you look back 3 years from now and look at the production from these 3 players, it's going to be something to see. It's going to be something to see. So that's just a little bit that I'm going to touch on Jahan Dotson. Like I said, if you didn't see how I felt about the pick initially, go tap into our last episode, and I'm going to link it at the end of this one. So going into our pick 47, or our 2nd round pick, we selected defensive tackle Phidarian Mathis from the University of Alabama, 6'4", 310 pounds. And this is a guy that, I knew a little bit about, but in watching film and, going over his draft profiles from a multiple draft analysts and things like that, everybody hails this guy as a run stuffer. But I'm going back and looking at his stats. This is a guy that had 9.5 sacks last year. So, I mean, this is a guy that everybody is showing him as, this is a long arm guy. He's a 2-gapper, coming from that University of Alabama system. So the Alabama defensive tackle to Washington pipeline continues with this pick. And speaking of that Alabama to Washington defensive tackle pipeline, one has to think, what does this selection of Phidarian Mathis mean for a guy like Daron Payne? I mean, I think it's not too much of a coincidence that, Phidarian Mathis was selected a couple days after Washington Commanders insider Ben Standing was saying that, we weren't expected to give a guy like Daron Payne a contract extension like we expected to give, or it has been reported that we given Terry McLaurin, or like we have gave Jonathan Allen in years prior, like last year. If you're following, if they're going down the similar career paths, or, career timelines, Jonathan Allen, reports were coming out towards OTAs, and then the deal got done right before training camp. But it's expected that according to Ben Standing, is not expected to have any extension reached with a guy like Daron Payne. So is this guy like Phidarian Mathis, who we drafted with high draft capital? This is a top 50 pick, who a lot of people think that we seem to reach on. And I think this was just a pick based off, Martin Mayhew, Ron Rivera, and Marty Herney, drafting based off need. This was a clear needs pick, but I think that this is one that's going to be, pretty good in the long run. Because like I said, I'm not opposed to drafting for need outside of round 1. Outside of round 1, like I've told you guys before, we're big best player available guys over here at Bleeding BnG. But in the later rounds, specifically in the mid rounds, I wouldn't want to do it in the 2nd round, but I'm not opposed to it because we did become very weak in in a snap of a finger over the course of this offseason, losing guys like Tim Settle and Matt Ioannidis at the defensive tackle position. So, you got to restart the stable. And, why not do it with a guy that's familiar? This is a guy that actually spent 5 years in college. So he actually played with Daron Payne his freshman year in college. So the irony in that is that we might have actually drafted his replacement as well. So a guy like Phidarian Mathis, be sure to look out. I think he's going to be productive. A guy like Matt Ioannidis, he's a guy that played 60% of snaps last year. So those snaps aren't nothing. Those snaps just aren't going to magically appear. And we don't seem to have anything at the defensive tackle position behind Daron Payne and Jonathan Allen. So I expect this guy to produce a lot. And I know a lot of people are talking about him being strictly a 2-down player and just a run stuffer. But I think a guy with 9.5 sacks, I think that he started to flash tremendous potential as a pass rusher and somebody that can play in that on third down. I think that he can play anywhere from the 0 tech to the 3 tech all over the line. So this is somebody that's beneficial in a multiple front scheme like Washington tried to deploy last year. I know I know our bases are 4-3, but we were deploying a 3-4 at times, a 5-2. It was getting crazy at times. So if we want to stick with a scheme like that, Phidarian Mathis, I think, can be a good prospect, even if a lot of guys think that it was a reach. With the 98th pick, we got our hammer, our sledgehammer, Brian Robinson, out of the University of Alabama. This is a guy not typical to the rest of, Alabama. We talk about Alabama's prospects and specifically running backs. We talk about how these guys have a lot of tread on their tires, but this is a guy that had to sit to the end of his career, basically. Coming from Tuscaloosa, he had to sit behind the likes of Najee Harris. He had to sit behind the likes of, I think, Derrick Henry his first year. Not Derrick Henry, excuse me, but he had to sit behind the likes of a slew of other Alabama running backs. And this is a guy that finally got his chance last year and took his chance and took the baton and ran with it, running for 1,300 yards. And this is a guy that I think can have potential to be your workhorse back. And I know a lot of people don't like me saying that because I know a lot of people still have high hopes on Antonio Gibson. And while I still do, I think that this is a guy that you need to pair with a guy like Antonio Gibson. These are guys that have similar builds. They're both about 6'2", but he's just much more of a natural runner. This is a guy that's a one-cut-and-go type back at 6'2", 225 pounds. I've never seen him over the course of this last year at Alabama. I never saw him fall forward or get tackled by the first guy. This is a sledgehammer type back, and this is a guy, as I mentioned, he doesn't have a lot of tread on his tires, so I expect him to do the same thing in the NFL. If you go back and look at the college playoff game against Cincinnati, he just took their manhood from one of the best defenses in college football. They ran the ball almost 30 times, and he got 200 yards just milking the clock away, churning and churning first downs. This is a guy, he's not explosive. He's not the most explosive back, but in a system like this North Turner zone-like system, outside zone-like system, I think that this was a home run pick. And I know a lot of people talked about, everybody was bashing our day 2 picks. Bashing our Alabama guys, talking about, we reached for these guys. Well, was it a reach when there weren't that many too many good running backs in this draft? Was it a reach when there weren't that many good running backs in this draft? And then you're considering a guy like James Cook was off the board. I mean, if you go back, I don't think a guy until Isaiah Spiller was the next drafted running back. So if this is a guy that was on your board, I actually think that we were blindsided by a guy like Nick Cross, who I think we liked a lot. He got drafted 2 picks before our 98th selection by the Indianapolis Colts. I think we were blindsided, and this was the next player, the next highest player on your board. And this is a guy that is going to be able to replace just spare Antonio Gibson. Antonio Gibson is, he led the league in fumbles last year. Despite the potential, despite all the potential that we want to think is there, or that everybody likes to lead us to believe, the positional flex that we haven't really seen. He's a wide receiver, but he hasn't really been used in the passing game like we expected, outside of a screenplay against Buffalo and things like that. Well, a guy like, Brian Robinson Jr., this is a guy that didn't fumble last year, or didn't fumble in his college career in over 500 carries. And like I said, he's a much more natural running back. And I think that, this is giving us a 1-2 punch at their running back stable, with J.D. McKissick starting to become more of just a strictly third down running back. There were instances in the last 2 years where we had to use, or we decided to use J.D. and, a one back, where we had to use him in a more traditional running back set. I don't think that those snaps are too far. I think that those snaps are far and few between now with a guy like Brian Robinson Jr. This is a guy that's tremendous in pass protection. He doesn't mind to stick his nose in there. And like I said, he's just the most natural runner. This allows you to move Antonio Gibson around like we were expected, or like we were sold when he was drafted to us in 2020. We were expecting him to be used like a Christian McCaffrey and things like that. I know a lot of people in the Washington Commanders community believe that he can be utilized like a Deebo Samuel. And while I am skeptical of that level type of play, I would love to see how he is in that using that role, which his receiver background. Antonio Gibson is a guy that I don't necessarily want to compare him to his Memphis days, because I think he's put on a lot of weight since then, and he's clearly considerably less explosive. But if he could go back to those roots, it wasn't too far. It wasn't that long ago, 2019, and this is a guy that did exude or did possess 4.3 speed at one point. So pairing him with that, hopefully he can get the lightning to a guy like Brian Robinson's thunder. Scott Turner doesn't have an excuse. He has a slew of weapons in his stable now. In the 4th round, we were selected Percy Butler. He's a safety from Louisiana, and just with this pick is speed. This is a guy I really didn't know too much about. So in my mind, I automatically thought reach, but going back, a lot of draft analysts, expected him to be drafted within that range or within a round. So I didn't think that was too much of a reach, considering, the opinions of others and things like that. And going over the few clips and a few little bit of film that I found, guys, this guy's a burner. This guy, he might be the fastest, most rangiest safety in the draft. And this is a guy who I think that he gives you the positional flex that Ron looks for. This is a guy that can play in the slot. This is a guy, he's a special team demon. So I don't think that, this prospects holds too well for a guy like Troy Apke, just like I don't think that unfortunately, the Brian Robinson selections prospects hold up for well for a guy like Jared Patterson as well. But going back to Percy Butler, this is a guy, he might be the best gunner in the draft. And that seems to be a theme with us drafting over the course of the last 5 years. Not even with just this Ron Rivera regime, but over the course of the last 5 years, since Troy Apke was selected, since Terry McLaurin was selected, and now Percy Butler, everybody's talking about we're drafting the best gunner in the draft, the fastest. And this is a guy that, unlike Troy Apke, this is a guy whose speed has shown up in coverage. I've seen him hard. If you go look back at the few clips that you can find, I encourage you guys to go on YouTube. There's a couple of clips, and the couple of clips that he has in 2-minute film, he got about 3 or 4 clips of him running dudes down. So it looks like this is just what he does. This is just what he does. So the speed is real. This is a guy that ran a 4.36 at the combine, and this is a guy that, there's a lot of potential there, especially playing at a single high role. This is a guy, if we can remember, Bobby McCain only signed a 2-year deal with this, and it's essentially, in reality, a deal that we can get out of after next season. So this is a guy that can essentially learn from Bobby McCain over a year while contributing in special teams, while also, hey, maybe having to step in a situation there, because 4th round picks are still pretty high draft capital that you expect to produce to an extent. Nothing crazy, but you do expect those guys to produce to an extent. So a guy like Percy Butler with the 113th pick, I wasn't too mad at. 4.36 speed with potential to be a damn good cover safety with that type of explosiveness and with that type of ball skills that he exuded at the University of Louisiana. The level of play does concern me a little bit, but the traits are there for sure. All right, with the 144th pick, the first pick in the 5th round was arguably my favorite pick, and I know it's a lot of you guys in the Washington Commanders community's favorite pick as well. And this is a pick of Sam Howell, quarterback Sam Howell from the University of North Carolina. This is a guy that, quite simply, 365 days ago, this is a guy that a lot of people projected to be in the running for the first quarterback taken, or the number 1 overall pick in this draft. So to get him 143 picks after that is amazing, and I can't really justify a 143 pick drop off. I can't. I can't justify a guy like Bailey Zappi. I don't care what kind of production he gave you at, Western Kentucky. I can't justify the Patriots selecting a guy like that over a guy like Sam Howell. This is a guy who, like I said, he was projected to be the number one pick at one point with Spencer Rattler. And while I never thought that was going to come to fruition, because while I think there are some physical limitations, and there are some physical limitations that allow him to slip to the 5th round. This isn't a perfect prospect by any means, guys. This isn't anybody. This isn't a guy that should have been on the board at 144. Just quite simply put it, this isn't a guy that shouldn't have been at the board on 144. The fall off wasn't too great that he's going to fall 4 rounds. And considering he lost 3 guys on his offensive line, and he almost lost all of his weapons. De'Ami Brown included, from his 2020 season, where he set the ACC on fire. He set the ACC on fire, which had many people projecting him to be the first quarterback taken this year. The drop-off wasn't real when he had dudes that was dropping passes all over the field all game. It wasn't just one guy. North Carolina sucked this year. He was the best thing about North Carolina. Every game they won this year was because of him. And I love this pick. This is a tremendous pick with the 144th pick. And I don't want to hear, you know what happened with Jalen Hurts and Carson? I do not give a damn about what Carson Wentz feels with this selection. We got better at the quarterback position with this selection. I believe that Sam Howell is going to easily beat out Taylor Heineke in training camp over the course of now until training camp, because he simply has the deep ball, he has the arm strength, he has the arm talent that Taylor Heineke just simply doesn't possess. And while I expect him to sit behind Carson Wentz over the course of this year, I think that this is a guy that maybe over the course of the next 2 years, he has the potential to step in and be your guy for a couple of years. And be your stopgap until you potentially find your true franchise quarterback, if he's not that guy. Because like I said, he was projected to be the number 1 pick at one point. In a not too distant past. I love this pick. This is the steal of the draft throughout the NFL. And this is the pick where I started to be like, all right, Washington. All right, y'all doing it. Y'all, all right. Y'all done outdid yourselves on this one. And this is where the pick started to turn around, because after that, I started to understand, and I started to agree with our picks more and more and more. I don't care if this guy is going to come in and intimidate a guy like Carson Wentz. You shouldn't mind that. I heard Coach Rivera had to check in and call Carson before you making a selection. That disturbs me a little bit, because why are you doing that with a 5th round selection? If Carson is as good as he thinks he is, he shouldn't be worried about a guy like Sam Howell. But guess what? He should be, with the talent that Sam Howell possesses. This is the guy that has arguably one of the best deep balls in the draft. I think in my opinion, he had the second best deep ball in the draft behind Malik Willis. And the stats showed it. Look at his RPM numbers coming out of the combine and things like that. This is a home run pick. And this is a guy, he was the best rated 4th quarter quarterback in the entire draft class through PFF's college grading. This is a winner. Daniel Jeremiah tweeted that he had the best 3rd and 7, 3rd and long reel of any quarterback in this draft class. And that's where you win games, especially when you want to surround, or want to base your team philosophy around strong defense. 3rd and long is essential. Moving those trains to give that defense a rest is essential. And to get the best quarterback in Daniel Jeremiah, who's been killing this draft coverage, to get the best quarterback in 3rd and long, in his opinion, is big. This is the best pick of his entire draft class. No shade of Jahan Dotson or anything. This is the best value. This is the most amazing value, and this is a hell of a pick with the 144th pick. So moving on to pick 149, we got Carson Wentz, a weapon, or maybe Sam Howell, a weapon. And tight end Cole Turner, he's 6'6", 250 pounds, out of the University of Nevada. And this is a guy that is kind of the yin to John Bates' yang. And he's a little bit of Logan Thomas insurance. With a guy like Carson Wentz, you have to give him big targets. The inaccuracy is going to be there. The chance taking is going to be there. Where he's going to take some risk. And he loves his big targets. Look at Alshon Jeffrey. Look at Michael Pittman. And while we thought we were going to do that at the receiver position, potentially if Drake London was there at 11, we did it with a tight end. This is a tight end that has a basketball background. And while he wasn't the fastest running the 4.7 40, The film that I've seen so far, I love the way that he uses his body in the red zone. He's an end zone. He's a red zone nightmare. I don't expect much of him for in the blocking game, despite his frame. But guess what? That's what you got John Bates for, because he was one of the best blocking tight ends in the entire NFL as a rookie. That is not hyperbole. Go look back at John Bates' blocking numbers. He was one of the best blocking tight ends in the entire NFL last year as a rookie, while giving you something in the passing game. So I think the future is bright in the tight end room. I think that I think that this might be Logan Thomas's last year with the Commanders. I know he did sign his contract extension last year, so he's going into his second year of that contract extension. I think it was a 3-year deal, so it's 1 year. It's going to be 1 year remaining left on that deal. But this is a guy that's on the wrong side of 30. Excuse me, coming off of an ACL injury, and I think that he has two young studs coming in behind him. I think that this is a guy that if Logan Thomas is missing the first month of the season, like he said, doctors expect him to. I know he said he's expecting to come back sooner than that. But if he does miss the first course of the first month of the season or something like that, I believe that Cole Turner and John Bates can fill those shoes tremendously. Because like I said, I think they give you different skill sets. You can line up in the 2-back system, and you can have John Bates stay in the pass block while Cole Turner goes out on a route of things like that, and vice versa. Just you can split it, Cole Turner out wide. Like I said earlier, Scott Turner has his weapons. Scott Turner doesn't have an excuse this year, and I think that's the biggest thing coming out of this draft. So going on to the 7th round picks, guard Chris Paul. This is not basketball. No, we are not playing basketball. This is a 6'3", 323-pound guard. I don't know much about Chris Paul, but he had a 9.4 raw athletic score for the offensive guard position out of the entire draft database. So that's amazing to see. And then Christopher Holmes, a cornerback out of Oklahoma State, who's about 6 feet, 200 pounds. And I know a little bit about Christopher Holmes, watching Big 12 football and things like that. This is a guy, he's physical at the cornerback position. I think he's a little tight in his hips and things like that. His technique is a little refined, but he's an old prospect. It's 25. So, a lot of teams weren't going to take a chance on that at the draft. So I think that's one of the reasons that he slipped all the way to pick 240. So this is just to go over an overall synopsis of this draft before we head on out of here. I think that, the trend that the team was looking for with a lot of these players is that the team is physicality. I know Martin Mayhew said it multiple times on his Friday press conference that they got tougher on Friday, and I think they got tougher over the course of the whole weekend. If you look at the entire draft class, outside of a guy like Jahan Dotson and maybe a guy like Cole Turner, everybody else is uber physical for their position as a draft prospect, including Sam Howell for the quarterback position. Sam Howell is a guy that had over 60 broken tackles this past season while running for 800 yards. So I talked about, while I was giving a breakdown of his draft pick, I talked about everything with his passing and his deep ball ability and his arm. This is a guy that ran for 800 yards, and I think that this is a knock on why he kind of fell, because I don't think he's an elite athlete by any means. So this is a guy that ran 800 yards simply off sheer toughness, sheer breaking tackles, and I think that a lot of people aren't expecting that to translate to the NFL level. But guess what? That showed me on the other end of the spectrum that he did what he had to do for his team to win. He did whatever it took for his team to win week in and week out. Whether that be running, breaking tackles, or throwing deep balls and throwing bombs. So this is a guy that can win any which way. And that's one of the other reasons why I'm excited about this Sam Howell pick, is the versatility that he has used as well. I'm sorry, I just had to touch on that. But this team clearly got physical. Even with a guy like Fandadrian Mathis. While they said this was a reach, nobody said this was a bad football player. And everybody said he was tremendous against the run, as we expect Alabama defensive tackles to be. The Brian Robinson as well. This is the guy that watching his film, I compared him to a guy like Chris Ivory, a physical runner. He runs a little upright, and I compared him to Chris Ivory because I don't want to give him the lofty expectations like Marshawn Lynch. But guess what? He runs with that bruising type style. He run with that bruiser type style. Go back and watch his film. I never saw him get tackled by the first guy. Never saw him get tackled by an arm tackle. We got more physical in that running back room. His is a guy that's not going to leave those expected yards, or those yards that were blocked for, that were left on the field that Antonio Gibson leaves, Antonio Gibson left last year. And I solely believe that. I strongly believe that. I strongly believe that. I strongly believe that. So we got a lot tougher. Chris Paul is nasty from what I've seen. Chris Paul is nasty. Percy Butler will come in and stick you. A lot of his film and a lot of his highlights that I saw were special team highlights of him smacking dudes playing the gunner position. So we know he'll stick his nose in there. So we know he's physical. He's going to be an instant contributor on special teams. And I just loved it. I love it. I love everything about this draft class. I'm not going to give it an A. I'm not going to give it any grade because I'm not in the business of doing that. But these guys did a lot, did very well in redeeming themselves after, I was upset in the first round, not because Jahan Dotson is a bad player by any means, but I just didn't want to pass on a guy like Jameson Williams. But these guys, hey, you can look at it as I mentioned with the trade package with Chris Olave earlier. You can look at it with Jameson Williams as well. If these three guys and Jahan Dotson, Brian Robinson Jr., and Percy Butler produce to the level that we expect them to or we want them to, I don't care what Jameson Williams does. Unless he's a 2,000 yard having a Cooper Cup type season, he's not going to outproduce those three guys in total. He's not. My biggest question, or one of the biggest things that I took away from this draft, is that we didn't draft a linebacker at all. Darian Beavers was sliding on the draft. Leo Chenal went later than I expected. These are guys that we passed up for. So I want to know, what is the plan at linebacker? Are we going to look in the free agency? Guys like Joe Schobert are out there. Guys like Dante Hightower out there. So that's one of the observations that I took from the draft. I would like for us to take a linebacker, but we did address the cornerback position and the safety position, whether that be later in the draft or things like that. But that also showed me that we still have a lot of faith in our last two draft classes, because a guy like Benjamin St. Juste, we didn't draft the outside corner until the 7th round, right? And, I think that these coaching staff and, the front office are still high on prospects like, a lot of people were talking about we need offensive linemen. Well, we didn't get one until the 7th round. So we're still high on guys like Samuel Cosme. We're still high on guys like Benjamin St. Juste. Even a guy like De'Ami Brown. While, Jahan Dotson is there and things like that, Jahan Dotson can play in the slot, and he doesn't necessarily give you the redundancy and skill set that a guy like Chris Olave would have gave you with a guy like De'Ami Brown. And then, hey, guess what? We're looking out for a guy like De'Ami Brown by pairing him with his college quarterback. De'Ami Brown was one of the league leaders in yards per catch and was one of the more explosive wide receivers in the entire country with Sam Howell in 2020. So hopefully they can rekindle some of that magic with the Washington Commanders. Because a lot of what Chris Olave did at Ohio State in 2021, De'Ami Brown did at the University of North Carolina in 2020. No matter how hard we are at the Bleeding BnG, I don't want to fake like I got fake optimism for De'Ami Brown, but the facts are facts. And De'Ami Brown does not have an excuse this year, because you're pairing him with a deep ball thrower that fits his skill set with Carson Wentz. And if Carson flames out, you're going to be pairing him with his college quarterback and his best friend that he called 30 seconds after the draft. So I'm excited. As you see, I got my training camp shirt on because now training camp is the next step. I can't wait till training camp. It's only a couple of months away now. And, hey, Washington did a good job in this draft. We got more physical. We got smarter. We got more mature. That was another thing from the draft. We got a lot of older players, players that spent 4, 5, 6 years in college. I think that had to do with a lot of the nonsense that we've been dealing with in the locker room over the course of like last season and things like that, trying to nip that in the bud. But I'm very excited about this draft class, and I hope you guys are too. So in the comments, just let me know how you feel about this draft class. Let me know how you feel about my overall synopsis of the draft class. Let me know if you agree. If you disagree, please let me know that as well. Let me know how you feel. Let me know who was your favorite pick in this draft class, because like I said, I'm excited. I can't tell you if I had to go with a favorite pick. It might be Cole Turner. But that Sam Howell pick, I just did that to not go with the cliche, because honestly, the Sam Howell pick is the best pick of the entire class. This might be the best pick in the entire draft, considering the value. Getting a guy that was projected to be the number one quarterback just 365 days ago with the 144th pick, and it wasn't like there was major fall off in play. There wasn't like it was a major fall off in talent and things like that. That's honestly the biggest steal in the draft. And that turned Washington's draft on its head for sure. I thought that we started out slow, but we ended very fast. And I think the optimism and the prospects for this draft class is very, very promising. So that'll do it for this episode of the Bleeding BnG podcast. If you haven't tuned in, if you haven't tapped in, be sure to follow our social media pages. Our Instagram is at Bleeding BnG. That's BLEEDING BnG. We'll post it on the video. Our Twitter is at Bleeding BnG. The spelling is spelled a tad bit different. That one is BLEEDIN BnG. Be sure to comment. Be sure to like, subscribe. Be sure to chat with us on Twitter. We love to discuss on the Washington Commanders, talking, bringing up new discussions, bringing up new content to discuss on. We have discussion posts. We have new content on our Instagram posted daily. So be sure to check us out over there. As I mentioned earlier, if you're checking us out on YouTube, be sure to comment, be sure to like, be sure to subscribe. We're appreciating all the support we're getting. And guess what, guys? Football season is almost here. I can smell the grass now. So thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of the Bleeding BnG podcast. I'll check in on you guys later. Peace.